The birth of American centralized intelligence in World War II was a story of rapid, chaotic, and idealistic growth. The Office of Strategic Services OSS, created by the charismatic and forceful General Wild Bill Donovan, was America's answer to the sophisticated spy networks of Europe. It was a haven for academics, lawyers, adventurers, and patriots, university of spies tasked with everything from sabotage and guerrilla warfare to research and propaganda. But in the fervent, anti-fascist atmosphere of the war, amidst an alliance of necessity with the Soviet Union, a poisonous seed was planted. The OSS didn't just recruit Americans to fight the Nazis. It inadvertently recruited Americans loyal to another cause entirely: Stalin's Soviet Union. At the very heart of this new intelligence apparatus, serving as the personal assistant and confidant to General Donovan himself, sat a man named Duncan Lee. He was a Rhodes Scholar, a Yale Law graduate, a decorated veteran, and a trusted member of Donovan's inner circle. He was also, according to decrypted Soviet cables and testimonies, Agent Koch, or Bark, of the NKVD, one of the most damaging Soviet moles of the entire war. His story is not just about stolen secrets. It's about how the Soviet Union, America's ally, systematically penetrated and manipulated the very organization that would become the CIA, shaping early American intelligence from within and planting a deep, lasting distrust that would freeze the world for decades. To understand Duncan Lee, one must understand the fertile ground of the 1930s that produced him. He was part of a generation of elite, idealistic Americans, appalled by the Great Depression and the rise of fascism. For many, the Soviet Union appeared as the only vigorous, progressive counterweight to Hitler. Lee, like many in his social circle, developed communist sympathies while at Yale and Oxford. These weren't just philosophical leanings. They were cultivated and directed by Soviet intelligence operatives working under diplomatic cover. Lee was recruited into the NKVD's sprawling American network, not as a low-level informant, but as a legal resident with immense potential. His impeccable credentials, his family connections — he was a descendant of Confederate General Robert E. Lee, and his sharp intellect made him a prize. The NKVD patiently built his career, steering him towards positions of influence. When war broke out and Donovan began building the OSS, Lee's background made him a perfect candidate. He joined in 1942 and, thanks to his abilities and his patron's influence, rose with meteoric speed. By 1943, he was Donovan's special assistant, with a top-secret clearance and access to the broadest possible range of information. Operational plans, agent identities, intelligence summaries, and the inner workings of Allied strategy. He attended high-level meetings, drafted sensitive memos, and had the ear of the most powerful spy chief in America. For his Soviet handlers, it was an intelligence bonanza beyond their wildest dreams. The secrets Lee passed were of catastrophic sensitivity. Through his handler, the notorious NKVD resident Jacob Golos, and later via the spy courier Elizabeth Bentley, Lee funneled a steady stream of documents to Moscow. He revealed OSS operational plans in Europe and Asia, compromising missions before they began. He exposed the identities of OSS agents being inserted behind enemy lines, effectively signing their death warrants if captured by the Germans, or as importantly, by Soviet-controlled partisans in Eastern Europe. He provided details on American diplomatic strategy and negotiations with other Allied powers, perhaps most damaging in the long term. He gave the Soviets an X-ray of the fledgling American intelligence community, its strengths, its weaknesses, its internal debates, and its key personalities. The Soviets didn't just learn what America knew. They learned how America thought about intelligence. This allowed them to run sophisticated deception operations and to plant disinformation that would misdirect American policy for years. Lee's access was so complete that he even warned the Soviets about the Venona project itself. Ultra secret U.S. Army effort to decrypt Soviet diplomatic cables, though the warning was apparently too vague for Moscow to act on. A failure that would later doom their entire American network. Lee's spy career was conducted in plain sight within the bustling, somewhat anarchic OSS headquarters. The agency's very ethos-innovative, non-bureaucratic. Trusting of its bright recruits was its Achilles heel. Security procedures were lax compared to later standards. The shared goal of defeating Hitler created a climate of trust that Soviet intelligence ruthlessly exploited. Lee played his part perfectly. The diligent, capable, slightly reserved Ivy League lawyer. He was well liked by Donovan, who valued his legal mind and discretion. The mechanics of his espionage were brazen. He would take documents home, photograph them with a miniature camera provided by the NKVD, and pass the film via dead drops or through Bentley, the spy queen who acted as a courier for multiple agents. The strain, however, began to tell. Lee, by some accounts, grew increasingly troubled by the betrayal, especially as the war turned and the true nature of Stalin's regime became harder to ignore for an idealist. The defection of Elizabeth Bentley to the FBI in 1945 blew the network wide open. In a panic, Lee and others were warned by their handlers to break contact. When confronted by the FBI, Lee, using his skills as a lawyer, deftly denied everything. He had formidable advantages. His sterling reputation, his powerful friends Donovan reportedly vouched for him, and the fact that the FBI's strongest evidence, the Venona decrypts, was so secret it could not be used in court. In the absence of a smoking gun they could reveal, the FBI could not prosecute. Duncan Lee walked away. The aftermath of the Duncan Lee case reverberated through the dawn of the Cold War and the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency in 1947. The OSS was disbanded, but its personnel and functions formed the core of the new CIA. The discovery of such a high-level mole created a trauma, a founding paranoia that became embedded in the CIA's institutional DNA. If Donovan's trusted aide could be a Soviet spy, who couldn't? This led to an immediate and often ruthless focus on counterintelligence and internal security. It fueled the rise of figures like James, Jesus, and the CIA's legendary and paranoid counterintelligence chief, who spent decades obsessed with the wilderness of mirrors, seeing Soviet deception everywhere, partly because he knew it had been everywhere in the OSS. The Lee case was a primary exhibit for those arguing for stringent background checks, polygraphs, and a culture of suspicion, a necessary evil that sometimes stifled the very innovation the OSS was famous for. Lee himself faded from public view. He returned to a successful private law career, never admitting his guilt, living with the secret until his death in 1988. His name was conclusively confirmed as a Soviet agent only with the post-Cold War release of Venona transcripts in Soviet archives. The story of Duncan Lee is the foundational betrayal of American intelligence. It proved that the deepest threats could come from within, from the most trusted and well-credentialed individuals. It showed that the alliance with the Soviet Union was, from Stalin's perspective, merely another battlefield, and it left an enduring lesson. An intelligence service that cannot protect its own secrets from its own officers is not just compromised, it is building its future on sand. The mole in the OSS didn't just steal secrets for a wartime ally. He helped forge the skeptical, guarded, and haunted mindset of the American intelligence community that would confront the Soviet Union for the next 50 years.